I think the thing that really strikes me is that when I do get a chance to talk to activists around the world, a lot of times they're feeling pretty desperate, or they're feeling isolated, or they feel like their intuition was wrong all along, and they feel pretty hopeless. If your intuition is that nonviolent resistance works, you're right. You know, it actually does work. It's the most reliable source of change in the world, according to our data. And it's not just the most reliable source of success, it's the most reliable source of being able to live in a society you want to live in after a conflict is already over.
8 months of our revolution for freedom and justice has passed. More than 4,500 people got killed by the Syrian regime, and tens of thousands got arrested and enforced disappeared. We face one of the most brutal regimes in the region and the world, mostly with peaceful protests, songs of freedom, chanting for new Syria and a new future, discovering for the first time within decades our voices and personalities. And how does it feel to bring down walls of fear as we stand for our beliefs?
In general, it has been, nonviolence, I think, is preferred by any serious person. You only resort to violence as a last resort. But I don't presume to tell Syrians what they ought to do. They have to work that out for themselves.
Culture, they resent us. There's enormous amounts of hatred, and it goes back in history because of resentment.
Yes, there's hatred against us. Why? As long as we are supporting harsh, brutal governments, blocking democracy and development, because of our interest in controlling the oil resources of the region, there will be a campaign of hatred against us.
I think the outcome of resort to violence is likely to be extremely destructive. Violent means generally, typically, place into power those who have used them successfully and will continue to use them, often very brutally.
We found some really impressive results about the record of nonviolent resistance, which is that it's over twice as effective in achieving both the ouster of a dictator or territorial changes than violent insurgency. My name is Erica Chenoweth. I'm an author and a scholar of civil resistance. I'm in solidarity with the Syrian people. I reject the brutality and killing that the Syrian authorities are committing against the unarmed Syrian people. And because silence is participation in this crime, I declare my participation in the resistance through the Syrian sit-in on YouTube. There are three major differences in societies that have experienced nonviolent resistance compared with those that have experienced violent resistance. In countries where there's been nonviolent resistance, they're much more likely to emerge from the conflict democratic. They're much more likely to emerge with a lower probability of relapsing into a civil war. And they're also much more likely to experience fewer civilian casualties during the conflict itself. As an example, in Syria today, the UN reports that officially 3,500 civilians have been killed in the course of the conflict. And this is a very large and disturbing figure, but it's nothing compared with the 40,000 plus that were killed in just 3 weeks of shelling of the city of Hama back in 1982, and the 200,000 people who had to flee the city for their lives.
You want to speak of a bottom line. The bottom line is the government has no legitimacy. We're living in the 21st century, and you have no right to hold power merely by virtue of the fact that you're the son of the person who held power before you. That's just completely unacceptable. And you can't treat a country and its people as your playpen. These are human beings. They are entitled to the same rights and the same dignities as everybody else in humankind.
Go ahead.
Hi. During your speech, you made a lot of references to Jewish people as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive.
I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears the crocodile tears.
The Jews did not take arms against the
My late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's being done. I have long past seeing the virtues of violence. I used to see some virtue in it, some rightness in it, some inevitability in it, but I can't see the virtue. No. It's a cliche, but it's true. It's very corrupting. And I'll be honest with you, I found it very difficult to disagree with Nasrallah at the beginning, because I respect him very much, and I respect the Hezbollah very much. On the other hand, there comes a point where you have to sort of stop with the politics, set them aside, and just look at what's happening with a kind of depoliticized eye, and just use a moral judgment. And the moral judgment is, you can't support what's going on in Bahrain, and support what's going on in Tunisia, and support what's going on in Egypt, and suddenly have a reserve an opinion on what's going on in Syria. And so Nasrallah made a historic misjudgment, which I don't think he will be able now to extricate himself from, if for no other reason that most Syrians now loathe him, even though a year ago they deeply respected him. And so Nasrallah made a historic misjudgment, which I don't think he will be able now to extricate himself from, if for no other reason that most Syrians now loathe him, even though a year ago they deeply respected him.
ويلعن روحك يا حافظ على الخلف المنزية سوريا بدها سوريا بدها ويلعن قناة الدنيا والقناة السورية سوريا بدها سوريا بدها ويلعن قناة الدنيا والقناة السورية سوريا بدها سوريا بدها ولما حقنا ردنا سمونا إرهابية سوريا بدها سوريا بدها ولما حقنا ردنا سمونا سلفية سوريا بدها سوريا بدها.
That repression, the killing by the Syrian government of its own people, that is not an answer to conflict in the 21st century. That's why journalism is so important, why reporters must be there, and why citizen journalists on the ground, whether with their cell phone, with a little video camera, with a little photograph, why it's so important to get word out, because that links people all over.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. As we turn now to Syria, the government crackdown on protesters in Syria has reached a new level of violence just as prayers ended Monday, the first day of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. At least 6 people were killed earlier today, pushing the toll to at least 150 over the last 2 days. An attack on the central city of Hama began on Sunday when more than 100 people were killed by government forces, continued into Monday with another 24 dead across the country. Syria has banned most foreign journalists, making it hard to verify exactly what's happening there. I have just gotten someone on the phone within Syria, and it's very difficult to do this. So we want to go right to Razan Zaitouna, who is the lawyer of human rights activists in Damascus, who's been reporting on the recent protests.
The Syrian government knows what it's doing when it says no to reporters, because it knows that the brutality that will be reflected in those pictures, those images that get out, is what's going to undermine them. It undermines injustice. It undermines lack of democracy. It exposes the truth. The reason the Syrian government has banned the journalists is because it knows no army is more powerful than a single camera showing the injustice of that image. Armed men against defenseless people.
يا وطننا ويا غالي بيا دار الدوع عليا يا وطننا ويا غالي هبت من درعا ثورة بتنادي بالحرية يا وطننا ويا غالي طالع خيل وجاسم والقورة الحورانية يا وطننا ويا غالي والشام يا بخت الشام والمراجل الخلدية يا وطننا ويا غالي وسباع يا باب سباع والمراجل الخلدية يا وطننا ويا غالي رستم تلبيس وبياضة مقابر للبعثية يا وطننا ويا غالي طرطوس منبع ناموس ويا محلاها اللدئية يا وطننا ويا غالي يا ربي حما حامية أهل الفدا نشمية يا وطننا ويا غالي والشهبة كلها تنام وتصحى رجال الحامية يا وطننا ويا غالي.
So if I were a Syrian activist, there are a few different mistakes that I could make. The first is thinking that I need to succeed right away or the movement is over. So I see a lot of activists sometimes thinking that because we've been at this for a couple of months and we feel like we're in a kind of a stalemate situation, we need to escalate our tactics to violence in order to win. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to help the movement to do that. In fact, with some research I've done with Kurt Schock, we find that having an armed wing doesn't actually help movements and can actually reduce the level of participation that the movements have already built up. So that can be a dangerous mistake. So impatience and thinking that arms is going to accelerate the process, those are two major mistakes. Another mistake is feeding into the disunity that might already exist in a society, or sort of falling into the trap of allowing the regime to keep the civilian population separated from itself.
The repression and the heroism in Syria, the remarkable bravery of people. There are those who have died, thousands of people, but how people are surviving now and how difficult, how impossible it seems. In the end, people working together in movements always prevail.
At this moment, you know the expression in English, you strike while the iron is hot. There's an opportunity came out of thin air. There's now this opportunity to free the Arab Muslim world from this dead weight that they've had to bear for nearly a century now. And opportunities in politics come and go. You miss them, and you may have to wait a very long time before it happens again.
بدنا الله على الجنة جنة 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 والله يا وطننا جنة 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 والله يا وطننا يا وطن يا حبيب يا ابو تراب الطيب حد غازي يا طيب يا ابو تراب الطيب حتى نار الجنة حتى نار الجنة ابو عبد الله سرحان رمز كل الشجعان ابو عبد الله سرحان رمز كل الشجعان تتهنى بالجنان تتهنى بالجنان يا شيخ تتهنى جنة 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 والله يا وطننا 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 يا وطن يا حبيب يا ابو تراب الطيب يا وطن يا حبيب يا ابو تراب الطيب.
As I say, sitting nice and peacefully here, I don't presume to tell people what they should do when they're faced with murderous military forces. But the courage of the resistance has been very impressive and inspiring, and difficult as it may be, I think pursuit of a nonviolent approach will be the best method of bringing in proper international support and indeed undermining the forces of violence themselves.
So if I were Bashar al-Assad, I would adopt a divide and rule strategy for the campaign. I would say, let me do two things here. The first thing I'm going to do is make them use violence against my security forces so that the security forces don't hesitate to kill. So I'm going to try to provoke them into taking up arms against me. The second thing that I'm going to do is try to sow divisions within the different groups in my society that I already know have tension. So I'm going to try to make it impossible for the Alawites, the Christians, the Sunni Muslims, and the other people in this country to come together in unity. So I'm going to try to stoke tensions between them and make sure that they're divided. And I'm going to try to terrorize people. And the reason I'm going to try to terrorize them is because I know that I cannot repress them. I can't do it forever. So I'm going to try to use terror to just scare them so that they don't come out of their houses and join this revolution. So even Adolf Hitler knew, as we now know from his writings, that no dictator can rule by force alone, that they have to have a psychological power over the people, and they do that by scaring the living daylights out of them. So I'm going to do some really nasty things, and I'm going to do it really publicly. And I'm going to make sure that people know that I'm willing to do these horrible things to people to stay in power so that they won't continue to rise up against me. So that's essentially my strategy. And so far it's not working, but maybe it will the more I apply pressure.